Hello, I'm Claire Smith and welcome to my channel. So today I'm going to be reviewing some Middle Eastern fragrances that I've been sent by Julija. So Julija's channel, scentsiblings.ca, is actually one of my favourites, and I absolutely love being in her car and listening to her thoughts about fragrance. Julija describes herself as a entertainer, and I would wholeheartedly agree with that. She is absolutely amazing. I love it when she says something that everybody's thinking but nobody says on YouTube. It's just so refreshing. So if you haven't checked out Julija's channel, please do go check her out. So Julija sent me this package about 3 months ago, and finally it arrived, and I've been trying out these fragrances and I just want to talk about them basically. If you've been watching me for a while, you will realise that I went through a bit of a Middle Eastern fragrance buying phase back in October, November. And I'd say I learned a few things from that. I think the first thing that I learned was that you get a big bang for your buck with Middle Eastern fragrances. If you want something that's really strong, that really projects, that is basically eternal in lasting power and has a huge trail, then Middle Eastern fragrances are probably where it's at for you. I think the second thing that I learned was that at the cheaper end of the market with your Lattafas and things like that, they are good value for money. They are perhaps not the best quality fragrances you're ever going to come across, but for the price you're paying, they are good fragrances. If you're paying £10 for a fragrance, you're not going to expect the quality that you're going to get with a fragrance that's £70 or £100. It's just not a fair comparison to make. So I think when you're trying Lattafa fragrances, you perhaps need to take into account the price point for the quality that you're getting. And the third thing I've learned about Middle Eastern fragrances is that the notes that are listed generally have very little to do with how the fragrance actually smells in the end. So with all that learnt, I'm going into trying these fragrances with more of an open mind and with a more informed point of view, I think. So the first fragrance is one from Attar collection, and Attar collection is a brand that I've never heard of, and the fragrance is called Khaltat Night. So this one, when I first smell it out of the vial, smells exactly like I remember Carte d'Or cherry ice cream smelling. I don't know whether you've seen Carte d'Or cherry ice cream, but it's vanilla ice cream but covered in a sticky sweet cherry syrup with glacé cherries, dark, sort of almost purple glacé cherries on the top. It is an absolutely delicious ice cream, and this is a delicious perfume. This fragrance really makes me think that this is something that Julija would really love, because she loves really gourmand smelling fragrances. And yeah, this is definitely a gourmand fragrance. Out of the vial, there's also a little bit of a sweet spiciness, you know, a very gentle, sweet cinnamon underneath everything. But really the cherries and the vanilla are the most prominent things to me. When I spray this, it's a slightly different story. So spraying this, I get more of the cinnamon note coming through. And it's not a sharp cinnamon, it's not a powdery cinnamon, it's just a very gentle cinnamon, almost like a Jelly Belly kind of cinnamon. When you eat one of those jelly beans, that kind of cinnamon, really sweet still. There's also a bit of a underlying booziness to this fragrance, and I'm not quite sure what that is, but to me it smells almost like a liqueur, something that you would maybe have after dinner, something perhaps even like not quite a cherry brandy, but something like that, or something maybe even sweeter than that, something like an amaretto, or even something like a boozy dessert, something with cherries in. And yeah, it's just very gourmand smelling. I think actually the cherry upon spraying is far more realistic. It smells very much more like a really ripe red cherry rather than a glacé cherry like it did out of the vial. I think because of the cinnamon in this fragrance, the apple is probably not as prominent as I think it is, but I just think of apple because I think of cinnamon. Those two are just linked. But actually, usually in fragrances, I'm not a huge fan of apple, especially if it's a very fresh apple. And here it's more like a cooked apple. It's more like an apple in an apple pie. I think this fragrance is really, really nice. I think it's probably not something that I gravitate towards much with gourmand fragrances, but I can see a lot of people loving this one. I think it's actually a really good interpretation of apples, cherries and cinnamon. And I think if you like those three notes, you can't really go wrong with this one. There is patchouli in this fragrance, but it's really not overbearing, it's not plasticky, it's not earthy, it's just hanging around in the background. And it's something that I think if you even don't like patchouli, it's not something that's going to bother you. As this fragrance progresses, it gets more powdery, but really you're left with that fruity, boozy, warm cinnamon. It's really a beautiful fragrance. So I can see why Yulia would like this one. While it is sweet, it does feel quite grown up and boozy. And I also think that it's something that reminds me of being invited round to someone's and, you know, sitting by a fire with a liqueur or something. It feels very cozy, is how I'd put it. I think this one would really stand up to the Canadian weather. I think it would work really well in the autumn, winter in the UK. It's something that actually I don't think is beastly in projection. I don't think it's too much, because I've found that with Middle Eastern fragrances sometimes. Sometimes they can just be too much for me. This one isn't too much. This one is really quite subtle, but it is really long lasting. And I think it's just really smooth and it feels like quite a good quality fragrance. So that's Khaltat Night by Attar Collection. So the next fragrance is actually one from Rasasi and it's called Le Yuqawam Jasmine Wisp. Are any other fragrances talked about from Rasasi as much as this one? I really don't think they are. So what was I expecting? Well, with a fragrance called Jasmine Wisp, I was weirdly enough expecting jasmine, but then I know Yulia hates jasmine, so in a way I also wasn't expecting jasmine, and yeah, I didn't get any jasmine. So this fragrance is just really, really fruity. It really makes me think of those Frutella sweets that you got in the 90s. So the fruitiness, but with a little bit of a creaminess as well. And yeah, the fruits in this are probably most prominently for me, the peach and the grapefruit. Those two are the things that I immediately smell. And then later on I get some of the passion fruit. So the passion fruit here is not as sharp as it is in nature. It's something that is really quite creamy. As it dries, it begins to get a little bit soapy for me, and I think this is where I like it less. So it begins to smell a bit like shampoo, and the creaminess that was there sort of starts to smell a little bit drier. In the dry down, I still get the peach and it's more prominent, but there's also amber and vanilla quite prominently for me. It's quite warm smelling, this fragrance, and I think that's why I'm having trouble, because I am not the world's greatest fan of peach, and the dry down of this fragrance just reminds me of Dolce & Gabbana's The One, which is a fragrance I ended up decluttering. So you can see why I probably wouldn't like the end of this fragrance. But actually I really enjoy the fruity opening, and to begin with I remember thinking, wow, this is a really crowd pleasing fragrance. I think a lot of people will love this one. This is really, really fruity and girly and pleasant. But yeah, the dry down was just where it all went wrong for me. I think I am not typical. I think a lot of people would love this fragrance, and I don't think this is something that, you know, if you're worried about trying this one, I don't think this is something to be concerned about. Something I would say about this fragrance is that it doesn't smell exactly natural. This is more on the artificial side of the fragrances that I've tried in this video, and I think this one is nowhere near as nice as the first one. But considering the price point is a half of what the first one was, so this one's around £45 to £50 in the UK, I can kind of see why it's probably less natural than the first one. So yeah, this one wasn't my favourite, but I don't think that's necessarily the same for everybody. So that's Rasasi's Jasmine Wisp. I'm not saying the other bit again, it's too complicated. So the third fragrance is actually one from Lattafa, and it's Bade'e Oudh for Glory. So this is supposed to be a dupe of Initio's Oudh for Greatness, which I think has been an incredibly popular fragrance. But Oudh for Greatness retails at £280 odd, and Bade'e Oudh from Lattafa, Oudh for Glory, retails at £21 in the UK. So I can clearly see why people would choose to buy the Lattafa over Initio. So I've seen people have really strong reactions to this fragrance. It's either instant love, which in most cases it is, or it's instant hatred. And yeah, I wasn't really sure which side I would come down on with this fragrance, but actually Oudh for Glory is absolutely fine. I think it's okay. So initially when I first spray this, it actually smells quite leathery to me, which I think is probably the saffron and the patchouli mixing, and perhaps the oud as well. It's something that makes me think of like quite a rough, dark leather, something that isn't smooth at all. As it dries, it becomes a little bit warmer, but really it becomes very much more medicinal with that oud. The oud here is definitely more medicinal than woody, more medicinal than barnyard. It's something that is really quite a clean, very approachable oud. I think this fragrance actually does have a lot of patchouli as well. It is something that is more of a woody patchouli to me than an earthy patchouli, but definitely does have an earthy facet to it. I think for me the dry down goes more towards a Baccarat Rouge 540 kind of vibe. It's something that is less sweet than Baccarat Rouge 540, and if you replace the fir balsam with the oud and the patchouli, that's really how this fragrance smells. I think the fragrance really did hit me the first time that it did start to begin to smell very medicinal, like a doctor's surgery, and like with that Baccarat Rouge 540 vibe. And it's not something from other people's reviews that I was expecting actually. Having watched quite a lot of people describe this fragrance, I don't think most people have been struck by this quite as much as I have actually. And I think that that's maybe just because I've been smelling a lot of things that reminded me of Baccarat Rouge 540 recently, maybe. And also probably because I'm a little bit fed up with that kind of vibe in fragrances. But actually in Oud for Glory, I would say that it's actually quite interesting. It's something that I honestly don't hate. I don't love this fragrance either, but it's something that I do think would smell good on other people. Having said that, if you ask my husband says, don't wear this fragrance. He really does not like this fragrance at all. And I think actually on him, it wouldn't suit him. I don't think he's that kind of person to suit this fragrance. So yeah, I think I would like to smell this fragrance on somebody else. This sounds really bad, doesn't it? On somebody other than my husband. But yeah, I would like to smell this fragrance on somebody else. I think it could be potentially very nice, especially in the dry down. I actually like the dry down much more than the beginning of this fragrance, although I do still like that leathery beginning. I've worn this fragrance probably the most out of these three fragrances because I didn't really understand it. And I think actually it's something that is incredibly strong. It's something that does last a long time. And also I've noticed that it lasts through showers. So I wore this one before I took a shower this morning, and I can still smell it where I sprayed it before I showered, and I did wash. So I think it's something that does have incredible staying power, and it's something that if that kind of staying power bothers you, you probably don't want to buy this fragrance. Would I buy this? I don't think I'd buy this fragrance for me, but I don't think I'd rule out buying it as a present for someone. I think this is something that somebody could really, really love actually. And yeah, I think this is a good fragrance for the money. I think for £21, this smells really interesting, and it's not something that smells rubbery to me. It's not something that smells obviously of low quality. There's nothing in here that smells bad. I can see why people like this fragrance, basically, is what I'm saying in a very long-winded way. So that's Oud for Glory by Lattafa. So just to summarise, I'd say the one that I would probably be most likely to buy would be Khaltat Night. I really did enjoy that fragrance, and it's something that I don't really have in my collection. The one that I definitely wouldn't buy would be Rasasi's Jasmine Wisp. I think that peach in the dry down is just a no from me. It's just something that I don't enjoy in fragrances, but I don't think that fragrance is something that other people would not enjoy. I think that it's just me that. So please let me know if you've tried any of these fragrances. I'd be really interested to know what you think of them. And also please let me know if there's any Middle Eastern fragrance houses that you think I should go and check out. Do you have a particular fragrance that you would really recommend to me? And also if you like this video, please like this video, and also please consider subscribing if you haven't done already. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.